Rolling one. You got it. We actually.
Well, that was very melodramatic.
All right. So can you just explain just give us a sort of brief overview of your childhood?
Speak louder.
Can you just give us a brief overview of your childhood growing up in Texas and spending summers in West Yellowstone?
Okay. Well, I was born in Temple, Texas, one of three kids. My father was a school teacher from Temple, Texas. When I started first grade in 1936, he started in the same school as a math teacher. After a few months, he became the principal in that school. And then when I graduated from that little grammar school and went to a junior high, he graduated also and became the principal of that school. So, but because he was in the school business, we had 3 months, summer months off. And we always went to Yellowstone. For the first few years, we camped at Fishing Bridge inside Yellowstone, put up a big tent for 3 months. And then after a few years, maybe when I was about 7 or 8, we moved over to West Yellowstone, Montana, which is on the western edge of Yellowstone Park. And my father built a motel up there, and then in later years, I think in 1962, I also built a motel. So we have a lot of fond memories about Montana and Wyoming and Yellowstone and the surrounding areas.
So what kinds of things would you do while you were on summer vacation with your family in Yellowstone?
Well, I remember one time telling my father that I was on vacation for 3 months. He said, "You're not on vacation." He said, "If you don't get a job, you're going to work for me." And he says, "You're not going to like that." So I got a job. I had all kinds of jobs. I washed dishes at the Totem Cafe for 50 cents an hour, 2 consecutive 8-hour shifts. So after 16 hours, my hand looked like I needed an emergency room. I made $8. And so, but I was a lumberjack. I cleared trails for the Forest Service. I was a professional fishing guide at age 13. I'd take clients out. I knew wherever fish was in that whole area. And we'd catch fish in the morning, and then I'd cook it out on the stream for lunch. And then we'd come in about 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. We always had fish.
Describe the first treasure that you ever found.
Well, the first treasure I ever found was a 17-year-old girl in Temple, Texas, going to high school. Her name was Peggy Proctor, and we started dating, and I think about 7 or 8 years later we married. But if you're talking about artifacts, you know, I'm an amateur archaeologist and an avid outdoorsman. In my younger years, I was always out in the woods someplace, and I was a fighter pilot in the Air Force for 20 years, which means I traveled all over the world, and I was always excavating in Libya or at Pompeii and all over Germany. You know, I didn't do a lot of excavating, but I did a lot of surface hunting, and it was very rewarding to me. I like to be out in the fresh air.
What about this one case? I think you found like an arrowhead when you were really young. You remember
Well,
that?
I was with my father. I was 9 years old, and he said, "Let's go arrowhead hunting." I said, "Okay," and we went out to a friend's farm near Cameron, Texas, and he had just plowed a field. And my father was an arrowhead collector, and he had a lot of them. So was my football coach, and we all hunted together usually. But I remember when I found my first arrowhead, and I've thought about it a million times. It was a very important point in my life, and I keep telling myself that little arrow point had been laying there for 1,500 years waiting for me to come along.
Wow. When did you move from Texas to New Mexico?
Well, I was born and raised in Texas. I joined the Air Force in 1950 when I was 1 month past 20 years old. And essentially that's when I left Texas, because the Air Force, they ship you all over the world. But I went to Vietnam in 1968 for a year, and when I came back, I went back to Lubbock, Texas to teach pilot training. And then I retired in 1970 after 20 years of service, and that's when my wife and I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And whose idea was it?
You know, I like the people in Lubbock, Texas, but it was flat. You know, I mean, you could see 500 miles in any direction, and it just didn't suit me. I needed water and I needed mountains, so I think it was my idea to go to Texas. But anything that I wanted to do, my wife would say okay, and off we went. I mean, next month we will have been married 61 years.
Wow. You just said that it was your idea to go to Texas. Do you mind just saying that it was your idea to go to New Mexico?
Say that again.
When you spoke, you said that it was your idea to go to Texas, and I think you meant New Mexico. Do you mind just re-saying that?
No. In 1955, I became aide de camp to a two-star general. And I met a lot of friends along when I was his aide, a lot of generals. And so from that point on, I was able to select whatever assignment that I wanted. And so when I went to Vietnam in 1968, my wife was waiting for me in Lubbock. She had asthma, and Lubbock was a good place for her to be. And so I arranged to be reassigned back to Lubbock, and I retired there in 1970.
Okay. How did you come up with the idea to start an art gallery?
When I retired from the Air Force, I had a wife and 2 kids. My retired pay was something like $800 a month. And we could get by with that in those days. You know, we didn't drink many Coca-Colas or that sort of thing, but I needed a job, and Santa Fe was the only place that I knew where I could recover. I had a bad tour in Vietnam. I was shot down twice. I took battle damage a number of times. I lost a few roommates, and I lost 22 pounds and didn't even know that I had lost it. So when I came back from Vietnam, I was beat up mentally and I was beat up physically. And Santa Fe was the place for me because I knew I wasn't going to wear a coat and tie, and I was going to wear short sleeve shirts and blue jeans and hush puppies, and Santa Fe was the only place I knew where I could do that. And along the way, I decided that I wanted to deal in luxuries. I didn't want to do anything where my best client gave me $500 or $100. I'm talking about 1 hour martinizing, J.C. Penney, the restaurant business. I mean, you could go on and on. I wanted to deal in luxuries, so I wouldn't have to worry about the check clearing, and it started working for me. After a couple of shows, well, I started making a few bucks.
And in your gallery, you had a sort of different policy about whether people could touch the art or not. Can you explain that?
When I first got into business in Santa Fe and built my gallery, I'd never been to college. I never studied business. I never studied art. I tell people I never learned the rules that make businesses fail. But I was up on Canyon Road one time, and I went in a little Kachina shop. It was called, I think, the Kachina shop. And 2 little old ladies ran it, and they were pretty strict. And I walked in that shop for the first time, and the Kachina dolls were just stacked everywhere. I mean, there were hundreds of them. And the aisles were narrow. And I saw little signs around on the tables. If you touch it, you bought it. You are responsible for your kids. Do not touch in big red letters. That just scared me to death. I put my hands in my pockets and tried to sneak out the door before I had to go to jail for breaking a Kachina doll. But I learned something from that. I went back to my gallery and I made a number of signs and put them different places on the tables and on pedestals that said, please touch, I am responsible. How can you buy something if you're not allowed to touch it? I never understood that philosophy. In 17 years in business in Santa Fe, I never had a client break anything. I had some people work for me break a few things, but and I always wanted to touch things. I mean, I'm a hands-on person. I like to pick things up and look at them.
Are you mischievous as well? Is there like a sort of, the idea of creating a game for people out of this treasure? I mean, does that sort of play into it?
I'm not sure I understand your motive in that question.
Do you have like a sort of, a side that likes to play games?
In business?
No, in
You're talking about the treasure?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. My treasure story, there's nothing gamesmanship about that. It's just cut and dried, and everything you need to know is there. There's no subterfuge any place with that.
Um, you mentioned that you are a fly fisherman. Is there sort of a similarity between the idea of being a treasure hunter and trying to chase trout in a river?
Well, the only similarity is that you got to be outside to do both. And I can't tell you how many thousands of miles that I've walked through the desert and through the mountains and along the streams and around the lakes, just looking for things. I always like to walk up on a beaver dam, for instance. I love that kind of thing. But over the years, I found, I think I have 3,300 projectile points that I found. And you find all sorts. I was with a friend here in Santa Fe about 15 years ago. We were walking way up someplace, and he picked up a fully loaded Colt 1860 Model Army pistol.
Wow. Somebody
lost it there probably 100, 200, 150 years ago, and he found that thing. I mean, it's a thrill. And I call my book that, The Thrill of the Chase. It's the thrill of the chase.
But you don't always, like when you go fishing or when you go treasure hunting or you're just out, you don't always find what you're looking for. But is that necessarily the point?
When I'd go fishing, whether I caught any fish or not, it didn't really matter to me. I can remember telling myself, I can hardly wait to get out on the stream. And I get out there and I put my rod together and I look around, and ospreys and eagles are flying around, and I'd just go over there and sit under a tree. I may sit there for an hour before I even start fishing. There's a quote in the new Joe Devine book. They never knew that it was the chase they sought and not the quarry.
Yeah. Was that part of your motivation? Can you explain? Was that part of your motivation in creating this treasure hunt?
The thrill of the chase?
Yeah,
sure.
I'm trying to share that with you.
I had several motivations. One of my motives, my main motive in writing the book and hiding the treasure was to get kids off the couch today, away from their little texting machines. And we have a problem in this country with our youth. We're obese, and I don't want to get into that. But yeah, we need for the kids to go out and smell the sunshine. And by hiding the treasure chest, it was a good way for a man and his wife to get the kids out and not only fishing but exploring. Nature is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I had several motives though too. As a matter of fact, a reporter from Texas called me on the phone and she said, "Mr. Fenn, I've read your book." She said, "That's a very strange book." She said, "Who is your audience for that book?" I said, "Lady, my audience is every redneck in Texas with a wife and 12 kids who lost his job, but he has a pickup truck." I said, "That's my audience. Tell him to throw a bedroll in the back of his truck and head out." And I stopped keeping most of my emails when I hit 65,000. But about probably 40,000 of those emails have said, "Mr. Fenn, we know we're not going to find the treasure, but thank you for getting me and my family out in the sunshine and smell the fresh air."
Yeah.
A lot of today with kids, they don't want to go out in the countryside. But once they get out there, they say, "Wow, why didn't we do this before?" And so, there's a very fortunate byproduct that came along with the treasure story.
Why?
We're going to turn over.
Okay.
Rolling 2.
So why use a poem?
Well, when I hid the treasure chest, I hid the treasure chest before I knew what I was going to do with it. But I needed a vehicle so that people. I needed a vehicle that would tell people where the treasure chest is if they could figure it out. And I told myself the best way to do that is write a poem. So I wrote the poem, and I think there's 24 stanzas maybe, I don't remember, but there are 9 clues in that poem. If you can follow the clues, starting at the first one, they will take you to the treasure.
Are the clues like, are they like, what's the word I'm looking for? are they like misleading or like twisted, or are they just like clear? Can you explain that?
There's no subterfuge in that poem. Everything is straightforward, and the tendency with thousands of people that are searching, they they tend to overcook the poem. I tell people to read the book and then study the poem 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 times. And then go back and read the book again slowly, looking for hints in the text that will help you solve the clues in the poem. That's the way to do that.
Yeah.
But you have to know where to start. If you don't have the starting point, you don't have anything. And I've said that the treasure is hidden in the Rocky Mountains somewhere north of Santa Fe.
By the starting point, do you mean the starting point in the book, or the starting point in the
poem? And you need to know where the first clue is in the poem. You have to find that spot. From then on, it's academic.
Gotcha. Right. You had going back to your military service, you had a couple of close calls. Can you just give us a brief explanation of either one or both of those?
I don't remember how many times I took battle damage flying an F-100 in Vietnam, but it was exciting. The first time I was shot down was in the south of Vietnam in a Delta region, and the first time I knew I'd been hit, I looked out at my wings and fuel was pouring out of the bottom of the wings. I had a 50 caliber bullets go right through my wings, and the wings are full of fuel. So I looked at how much fuel I had left and how far I had to go, and I told myself, I'm not going to make it. I had about 60 miles to go, and I didn't have 60 miles of fuel left. But I kept telling myself, I don't want to jump out because somebody's going to shoot me in a parachute, and I knew I didn't want that to happen. But I said, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to get as close as I can. And about 2 or 3 miles out on final, my engine quit, ran out of fuel. And I told myself, I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to make it. And then all of a sudden, I dropped the gear and dropped the tail hook, and I touched down on the runway, and the tail hook engaged a big heavy anchor chain, boat anchor chain. And I think I touched down at about 240 knots, and I stopped in 300 feet.
Whoa.
I mean, it takes 10,000 feet to stop an F-100.
Yeah.
It jerked the back end of the airplane off, strained my back. I was in a shoulder harness and strapped in tight, but that was make your pulse quicken just a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. All right, sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked there. Can you tell us what's actually in the treasure box? Can you just
You asked me about both times I was shot down.
Oh, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
The second time I was shot down was on the 20th of December, 1968 in Laos. I was dropping landmines on the Ho Chi Minh Trail near Chapon, and I knew that on the several days before my mission, we had lost a couple of Navy airplanes and some Air Force airplanes on that same target. So the mission required for me making 2 passes at about 500 feet above the ground and as fast as I could travel, and that was about at that low altitude. The F-100 doesn't want to go real fast, but I was going about 600 knots. And I think I got hit on the first pass. And I designed that pass to going into the sun to surprise the guns. And then I was going to pull up in Whifferdale and come back out of the sun, hoping to blind the guns. Well, I think they hit me going in, and I know they hit me coming out because they shot the canopy off my airplane, and big jagged pieces of plexiglass were looking at me right here, and I looked at my gauge. It looked like a Christmas tree. What you don't want to see on an instrument panel in a fighter are yellow lights and red lights, because yellow means danger and red means get out. So I was shot up pretty good, and I got but I had a lot of airspeed, so I pulled up and made another pass because I saw the guns that shot me down. They were above me on the side of a hill. And so I heated up my 20 millimeter high explosive incendiary gun bullets, and I shot those guys. Not so much aiming at the target, but I wanted to mark where the gun was because I had 3 wingmen that were loaded for bear, and so they shot the guns up pretty good, but I still had some airspeed after my engine quit, and I think I got about 30, 40 miles away to what looked like a remote part of the Laotian jungle. And I waited till the last minute again because I didn't want to get shot in a parachute, so I jumped out at about 1,000 feet above the ground, and it was the whole thing was wonderful. I mean, everything worked, and
This is where you saw the small clearing in the forest.
Say what?
This is where you saw a small clearing in the jungle that you wanted to go
No,
back to later?
that was much earlier.
Oh, okay.
That was, but I later met the airman that packed my parachute, and I got to know him. I bought him a couple of beers and thanked him for doing a good job on that packing my parachute for me.
I bet.
Just say like he was shot down twice in Vietnam, just
Yeah.
to package it up more.
Yeah, sure. Do you mind sort of just condensing that down and just sort of explaining that you were shot down twice while flying in Vietnam?
I was shot down twice during the Vietnam War. The first time was in the Delta region of Vietnam, down below Saigon, and the second time was in Laos on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. My target was Chapon, which was right in the middle of the trail where all the munitions came in from North Vietnam into the south.
Gotcha. Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Can you just explain a few of the things, the physical items that are in the treasure chest?
Well, when I decided that I was going to hide the treasure chest, I was fortunate to find a beautiful little 10-inch square Romanesque cast bronze treasure chest that was beautiful. And I started, it took me a while, a couple of years to fill that thing up with things that I wanted the treasure chest to be visual, enough to excite someone's imagination. And I wanted it to be worth enough money so that to inch them out the door and into the woods. And so that meant, but yet the treasure chest was small, and so I had to, everything said gold, and rubies and diamonds and emeralds and sapphires. And so that's what I did. There are 265 gold coins in that treasure chest. Most of them are American eagles and double eagles. There are some ancient Middle Eastern gold coins. I can't read the dates, but I think we're talking 12th, 13th, 14th century. There's a lot of pre-Columbian. There's probably 10 or 12 ancient pre-Columbian artifacts, gold frogs. There are two ancient Chinese carved jade figures that are wonderful. I mean, and there's a wonderful fetish necklace from the Sinu and Tairona cultures. Carved fetishes made from quartz crystal and chalcedony and even some bronze, cast gold jaguar claws. And then I said in my book, I think I said in my book, when the treasure chest was ready to go, I had a bracelet, a silver bracelet with 22 disc turquoise beads in it. The turquoise beads had been found by Richard Wetherell at Mesa Verde the very first day he discovered Mesa Verde in the late 1800s. He crawled down into that place and picked up those 22 little turquoise beads. About 1903, an Indian working for Richard Wetherell excavating Mesa Verde made that robe bracelet for him. And the thing about it is it fit me perfect. And I think he sold it to Fred Harvey, I think in 1903 or sometime like that. And when Fred Harvey died, his entire collection was acquisitioned into the Herd Museum in Phoenix. Well, I won that little bracelet in a pool game, shooting pool with Fred Harvey's grandnephew, Byron Harvey. And that's how I acquired that thing. So it has sentimental value to me, but that was the last thing I put in a treasure chest. And the thought came to me when I put that in the treasure chest and closed the lid, the thought came to me that a little part of me is in that treasure chest also.
Yeah, but you also put your memoir in there, or a biography of yourself.
Well, I said in my book that my memoir was 28,000 words. Actually, it's 32,000 words, but that's a lot of words to put in a little treasure chest. So I took it to Kinko's and printed it so small. I mean, I printed it with their smallest font, and I have to use a magnifying glass to read it. But I put it in a little olive jar. You know those cute little olive jars with a screw-on lid. But the lid didn't make that jar watertight. So I heated up some microcrystalline wax, and I dipped the lid of that little jar in the hot wax to seal it. I guarantee you water's not going to get in that jar. So, and I pulled a couple of my hairs, and I put those in the jar because, you know, if that thing is found 1,000 or 10,000 years from now, maybe somebody will want to do some DNA tests or carbon-14 or whatever, and they'll find out who this idiot was that did this outrageous thing.
Right. Yeah. Are you worried that the chest is out there like getting wet or weathered or?
I know that it's wet. I mean, I never did say that I buried it. That doesn't mean it isn't buried, but if something's in the Rocky Mountains, I mean, how is it not going to get wet? It gets rained on in the summertime. Even if it was buried, it's going to get wet. And if it's not buried, it's going to get cold and wet with snow and whatever. So I know the thing is wet. But I was careful. I tried to think of those things. There's a couple of bracelets in there. One of the bracelets has a steel hinge on it. I knew that was going to rust. So I put it in a couple of Ziplocs, and you know, I don't know what the life expectancy of a Ziploc is, but it's certainly not 1,000 years. But anyway, I did what I could. You know, I mean, there's so many things to think about, and one of the things that was paramount in my mind was that I didn't want to go home and say, "Oh, geez, I forgot that." Too late for oops.
Do you want the treasure to be found in your lifetime?
You know, I've been asked that question. Do I want the chest to be found in my lifetime? I've been asked that question 1,000 times, and I can say honestly that I'm totally ambivalent about that. You know, yes or no. Part of me says yes, but a part of me says no. So, you know, it's out of my hands now. I mean, that treasure chest is part of a historic document that, I mean, the Rosetta Stone was buried 2,000 years. And I said in my book that, don't you know, the guy that carved that thing is proud of himself 2,000 years later that it was found. Yeah. So that's the way I look at that.
What do you want your legacy to be?
You know, I don't want a legacy. Legacy is something that happens to you after you're dead, and I don't want to control. I have no control over that. But to answer your question, I mean, there's going to be a legacy whether I like it or not. And until the treasure chest is found, my name is going to be an asterisk in the book that talks about that treasure chest. And you got to say that that's a legacy. But also, I don't know whether you know it or not, but I've made a number of cast bronze jars and bells that I have buried in the desert and in the mountains. I've buried 8 of them, and I buried them so deep that a metal detector can't find them, and so remotely that I couldn't go back to them myself and find them. And I can see one of those things being dug up 10,000 years from now when somebody's making a footing for a building or something, and they're going to screw off that jar and find my autobiography in there in a little olive jar, and they're going to read that thing and say, "Good Lord, look at this guy 10,000 years ago, what he did." So I'm going to be famous.
Turn over.
Okay.
Rolling 3.
All right. What do you say to people who think you're crazy or a public nuisance, or that you're like getting people to dig up outhouses or graves or national parks or any of that kind of stuff?
I pretty much agree with them. I mean, how can you be a maverick? You know, I hope somewhere in my distant past there was a pirate, because I have that instinct in me, I think. I mean, I don't want, I never wanted to break the law, but I wanted to bend some of them a little bit. You know, how do you know where the edge is if you don't go out there and look? And I'm not the type of person that you'll find walking down the center line. It's just not part of me.
Do you feel like you want to inspire other people to have those feelings or to do things that are a little different than they would normally do?
I don't know that I can inspire anybody to, I mean, a personality is a personality. If you don't have it in you, then you can just laugh and go play canasta. You know, that's the way a lot of people are. But I have inspired some people because they've told me that by emails. You know, I would never have gone to Yellowstone or to Yosemite or to Bandelier if you had not lured me out there with this treasure story.
Yeah. Can you just give us the sort of condensed version of your cancer diagnosis and when that was and what type of cancer you were diagnosed with?
Well, in 1988, for a year or so, I'd had a small pain in my lower groin, just a very insidious little, not an ache, it wasn't even a pain, but it was consistent. And so after a while, I went to the hospital. I went to a doctor, and he said, well, I don't think there's anything to it, but let's run some tests. So they gave me this stuff to drink, and the first time I knew I was in problem, I was laying on a bed in the hospital, and this nurse says, quick, girls, come over and look. I knew I was in trouble when she said that, and it turned out that my right kidney wasn't working. She had never seen a body that had one kidney. And so it was a novelty for them, but at my expense. But I called a friend in Phoenix who was president of the Maricopa County Medical Association. I said, Bob, find me the best urologist in America. So a couple of days later, he called me with the name Taylor Floyd in Albuquerque. Taylor Floyd had probably, I think at that time, he was the only doctor in New Mexico that could transplant some of the organs. So I went to see him, and he said, well, just because your kidney isn't working doesn't mean you have to take it out. He said, you can leave it in, but since you have a little pain there, let's take it out. I said, what are the chances of being cancer? He said, 5%. I said, okay. So a 2-hour operation turned into 5, and he told me I had a 20% chance of living 5 years. So that's when the treasure, I said, if I've got to go, who says I can't take it with me? Sure I can. I'm not going to live by everybody else's rules. And that's when I got the idea to hide a treasure chest. Sure, I can take it with me.
Did you get this idea from somebody or from something, or did it just strike you in the?
It just came to me. I thought I was going to die. 20% chance, 1 out of 5 is not very good. But I told myself, if I've got to go, I want to do it on my terms. I don't want to die in a hospital room with everybody around gawking at me with tubes all down my throat. I said, I want to die in the mountains or along the stream or something. I said, dying is very personal. It's something you have to do all by yourself. And to be frank about it, I don't want anybody watching. So I told myself, I'm going to write this poem, I'm going to hide this treasure, and with my last, if I have another terminal illness, my last dying gasp will be to go out there and where that treasure chest is and take my own life on my own terms. That's important to me.
Yeah.
The problem was that I got well. You know, it ruined the story. But I said, well, I can still hide the treasure chest, and that was 1988, and I'm still around kicking. I'm mostly vertical now.
Does that mean that you hid the chest in 1988? Have you said when?
No, that's when I got cancer in 1988.
Have you said when you hid the chest or what year?
I have not said when I hid the treasure chest because that's a clue that I don't want to give. But I can say that I was either 79 or 80 years old when I did that. And I tell people, don't go looking for a treasure chest on top of the mountain someplace where a 79 or 80-year-old man can't take it up there.
Right.
Nature's like inspiration in nature. Wouldn't be
Oh, okay.
It's
Okay.
like, what is nature?
I don't feel like I'm giving you guys very much.
No, this is great. I think it's great. We'll ask some harder questions that you'll want to say no to soon enough here. Like, where's the treasure? All right.
If I told you, I'd have to kill you.
Can you just explain what was your motivation for hiding this thing in a beautiful place, or in the Rocky Mountains, or your relationship with nature?
When I decided to hide that treasure chest, I knew exactly where I was going to go, where I was going to put it. It's in a place that's very dear to me, and I don't want to get too far into that because it'll give you a time frame, and that's a clue that I don't want to reveal. But there was never a second choice. There was never a second choice. But I will say that the person that finds that treasure chest is somebody that's going to figure out the clues, and he's going to go to it. Nobody's going to happen upon it. I mean, nobody's going to find it out on a Sunday afternoon picnic or during spring break. I mean, they're going to have to. They're going to earn it.
Yeah.
But I've also said, and I believe this with all my heart, the person that finds that treasure chest and puts it on their lap and raises that lid for the first time, they're either going to start crying, or they're going to start laughing, or they're going to collapse, one of the three. But it's such a visual sight. Emeralds and rubies and diamonds and sapphires and gold and antiques and jade, carved jade. It's pretty atrocious when you get right down to it.
Yeah.
So your inspiration, nature. I mean,
What?
Your life in nature. I mean, in the course of your life, what role has nature played in your life? I mean, obviously from fishing to just all of your exploration. I mean, your relationship with nature?
Well,
Can you describe it?
What part has nature played during my life? Well, I don't know for sure, but I think when I was born looking out of a window, and I never stopped looking out of the window. In high school, I sat by a fire escape. And the window was open when the weather was good, and when the teacher wasn't looking, I could climb through that window and slide down an old iron fire escape. I mean, the lure of the smell of freedom was superseded anything that the teachers had to teach me. And that's why I made D's and F's in I think I graduated because my father was a principal. But nevertheless, I never felt like they had anything for me. They certainly didn't have anything that would command my attention. This one teacher, Spanish teacher, she said, "Forrest, don't you know anything?" I said, "Miss Ford, I don't even suspect anything." And then the bell rang and I got out of there.
What do you say to these recent reports that the treasure has been found?
I put that guy's name on the list with about 45 other names of people who say they have the chest in their possession and they're looking at it. And I'll say, "Well, did the hot water have any effect on the gold coins?" And they say, "Well, hot water?" I said, "Thank you," and hang up the phone, or because they thought I gave them a clue and they're going to go out and look for the treasure. And this one guy, I said, "Well, will you, if you have the treasure, will you sell me the earrings?" And he says, "What earrings?" So they try to bait me, and I bait them right back, because none of them are willing to say where they found it or send photographs.
Right.
It's a dead giveaway that they don't have it. They need their 15 minutes, and so it's okay with me.
This guy who had this theory about the warm water being soldiers crying at the Vietnam Memorial.
Yeah.
Can you?
Oh, sure.
Can you respond to that?
Oh, some of the emails that I get are so wonderful. This one little girl, I think she was about 8 or 9 years old, she sent me an email. She said, "Mr. Fenn, if I find a treasure chest, do I have to share it with my brother?" I mean, that's the kind of monster that I'm glad I created with this thing.
Well, I mean, can you give us something that will help people, a 10th or 11th or a 12th clue the way that you did?
That will what?
Broad brush.
Yeah, can you tell us someplace that the treasure isn't buried, for example?
Well, the treasure is not buried where you're going to find it. That's the first thing. But people have asked me for clues, and sometimes it's just hard for me to say no. The first clue I gave was this lady in Minneapolis called me on the phone. She said, you have to help me out. Give me another clue. I said, okay, I'll give you a clue. I said, the treasure is more than 300 miles west of Toledo. She said, oh, thank you. She thought I'd really helped.
Well, you mentioned you mentioned in the book that you cutting.
Rolling 4.
Basically, the clue should be baked in the out as I've already said too much.
Sure.
It's cryptic. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
cryptic delivery.
Right. Yeah. In your book, you mentioned that there are other clues sprinkled throughout. Not just in the poem. Can you point us toward one of the other ones that's in the book somewhere?
No, there are no clues except in the poem. There are some hints in the book. The hints won't take you to the treasure chest, but the clues will. But the hints will help you with the clues. So you have to go in the back door, but they're subtle. That's why I say read the book normally the first time, and then go back and think about each sentence as you read it. Look at the pictures and the drawings, and in a very subtle way they can help you if you have your mojo working.
Yeah.
Have you told anybody that it's wet before?
What?
Earlier you mentioned that the treasure was wet. You said I know.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you want to?
Earlier you mentioned that the treasure was wet. Is that an admission that it's above ground, like just sitting somewhere, or is that?
No, that's not. I know the treasure chest is wet because physics says it's supposed to be wet.
Right.
Meteorology says it's supposed to be wet. So, if I buried the thing 20 feet deep, then you might make the argument that it isn't wet. But the Rocky Mountains are wet most of the time, summer and winter both. And if it's not raining, it's snowing. And so if I buried the thing 6 feet deep, and I didn't, then it's going to be wet.
Right. Yeah. Can you say whether it's buried or not?
I've never said that it was buried, no, and I don't intend to. That's a clue that I don't want to reveal. I've never said that it wasn't buried.
What about? Is it in New Mexico somewhere?
It's in the Rocky Mountains somewhere.
All right. Let me try. I'm trying to think of another. Have you said whether the House of Brown is a brown trout?
No.
First of all, I didn't say the House of Brown. I said the home of Brown.
Brown. It's different.
That's different.
But I'm not going to answer that question.
Forrest, have you, just in terms of the clues that you have given, not asking for a new one, have you ever told people that the treasure is wet? What we're trying to do with this, is basically explain, we want the delivery of this, in this piece.
You want what?
Basically, our idea for this video is to basically we're not going to have you come out and say, here's a clue.
You're looking for something new?
No. What we want to end with, honestly, is you saying, I've already said too much. And make people think somewhere in what you've already delivered, there was a clue. But not, kind of a poetic, cryptic delivery is essentially what we're trying to say. So if you've never told people that the treasure is wet, then the clue is already there. You understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Well, you've asked me a lot of questions, and most of them I've answered, a few I haven't. But I got to tell you, there's one thing I told you that I wish I had not.
Okay, that's perfect. Great.
Is that a good finish?
That's a great finish. Do you mind saying that to me though instead?
Yeah, just one more time to him. Just say exactly the same thing.
What did I say?
You said one thing. I told you. I've answered a lot of questions.
Okay. I've been sitting with you here for about an hour talking to you, and I've answered most of your questions. There are a few questions I haven't answered, but one that I didn't answer now I wish I had not.
Can you say I've already said too much?
I've already said too much.
Okay, that's great. there were a couple of things from your book, a couple of lines from your book that we liked that we thought we could just read to you and see if you would say them back to us. There was one that says, "What do you think? For me, it was always the thrill of the chase."
Is that a question?
No, that was a line from your book. I was wondering if you would just say that one back to us.
Oh, you know, there are a lot of good things in this life. And when you boil it all down, it comes right down to the thrill of the chase. You need to do it for yourself. Don't ask for help from somebody else if you can do it. Go out there and do it yourself. It's the thrill of the chase.
That's excellent. Now, when we met with you last week, you'd mentioned about being able to tie a certain number of flies to sell in a certain amount of time. Can you explain that?
Well, when I was 12 or 13 years old in West Yellowstone, I worked in a tackle shop that was owned by a guy by the name of Don Martinez. I had to love Don Martinez, but he was drunk most of the time. So I'd open the shop about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd work all day long tying flies. I tied catgut leaders, tapered leaders. I made a few split bamboo fly rods. And we didn't have a lot of business, but I could sit there behind the counter and tie flies. And one day I just counted how many flies I made just for my own interest, and I'd made 144 flies and waited on customers all at the same time. When I was tying flies, I could do it without thinking. And when I do things without thinking, that gives me time to think.
Yeah, that's great. And then there was one other line, "It'll make you rich with adventure."
What?
It'll make you rich with adventure.
Did I say that?
That was in your book.
That I'm rich with adventure?
No, that was
that was
VO.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
it's more inspiring people. I mean, the adventure of you're inspiring people to go out and look for this, and in doing
Well,
so, what are you trying to inspire in people?
Well, my last two books were The Thrill of the Chase and then Too Far to Walk. And both of them are full of adventures, stories, and things. And I hope that I'm inspiring particularly young people to go out and emulate some of those stories. Do it for yourself. Go out and generate your own memories. You don't ever get any younger. The time is drawing nigh for all of us.
Yeah.
Go do it yourself. It's the thrill of the chase.
I think that's mostly got it. Is there any, is there anything else that you want to deliver to us to help get people excited for next summer's, treasure hunting season?
There's no way to measure the impact that my treasure story has had. But I think that we took 10,000 people through Yellowstone Park that would not have gone this last summer. And the occupancy rate in the motels in Santa Fe is up 6.2% over last year. And some people credit the treasure story with bringing people to town. And so many of them send me emails and want to meet me, and I just can't meet everybody. I wish I could, but I would have to. They want to shake my hand and want me to sign their book, and I hate to tell them no, but I could see 25 people a day if I said yes. I do say yes to some people, but it depends on what mood I'm in. But I've written 10 books, and I have 3 more. I have one that's being laid out now, my greatest effort probably. But I have 3 more in my computer that I'm being distracted from, and I think to the point now I've pretty much given up, and I can probably say that I won't finish those books.
Descriptive, like landscape description, basically being inspired by landscape kind of stuff.
What about like if you could picture yourself where you were standing on the treasure? Can you describe like what it looks like in this area? Like whether is it a beautiful place, or just give us a sort of like vague description of the place where it is?
If I was standing where the treasure chest is, I'd see trees, I'd see mountains, I'd see animals, I'd smell wonderful smells of pine needles or pinon nuts or whatever, sagebrush. That's what those are the impulses that would come to mind. I don't want to say any more than that.
That's great. That's perfect. Okay.